welcome to the podcast, episode 3, where today we're going to be discussing technological advancements. As I'm sure you can understand, there has been an obvious change in evolution, say, since 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, films were relatively still, I'm using the film as an example here, films were still, relatively grainy. They weren't as good as they were now, right? But now, we have, 8K quality, HDR, all of it, and, that has made the film industry a whole lot more popular, because back then it used to be, all of the cameras back, say, in the 50s were essentially all the same. They were all black and white, slightly grainy. None of them were really different, right? So back then, it was just a judgment of how good the actors were at doing their job. Now, it is two of which. It is how good the movie looks and how good the actors are at acting. And currently now, it is relatively hard, to find a movie with good actors. Because all of the actors back then were, they dedicated their lives to doing this thing. But now, they're just kind of finding these people that said, yes, I want to be an actor. I went to college, so that means I must be a good actor. No, that doesn't mean you're a good actor at all. And I'm sure you can guess, it's not just the film industry, right? It is, well, all of the industries, right? So, say, 60 years ago, right? We were in relatively large, the factories that would make, say, the things in our house, such as lamps, right? They were massive, right? And factories today, they are still massive. And I hate to say this, but they are, quote-unquote, more economically friendly, supposedly, right? But then it was, alright, George, I've made the base for this lamp. You go ahead and do the shaft now, and Billy across from there, he'll attach the lighting fixtures, and then Sarah back here, she'll go ahead and attach the shade, right? Now, it's all automated, right? It's all made by robots. And some of which, isn't, obviously, because, robots need a little bit of help. The robot revolution hasn't started yet. But anyway, so, again, not all robots can make something, right? They still need assistance. And they always have. So far, there is no such thing as a robot that doesn't need help, right? And, you can prove this by opening up, I'll just use a lamp again as an example again. You can open up a lamp box and you can see the pieces you need to assemble the lamp. Well, and that's not convenient. I want my lamp assembled. You guys need a robot that can make me a lamp, that can make a lamp all by itself, right? That's not how it works, okay? We haven't, as I said in episode 2 about chatbots, we have never perfected something. Perfecting something is not a thing, and it never will be. And feel free to bicker about it all day. It's not a thing, right? And it's exactly why there's no such thing as a lamp, or I'm sorry, a robot, that can make, say, a lamp without any help. That's not a real thing, and I assume it won't be within, say, the next 2 decades. So anyway, dating back to the first episode about electric vehicles, they also have a technological edge, right? They are a lot more cleaner. Alone, they're a lot more cleaner, but, you know, if you go behind the scenes, they turn out to be just as worse as gasoline cars. But anyway, you know, you go into these Teslas, and then you see the, 1,000,000-inch screen, and, well, that's it. I mean, you have pedals, a screen, and a center console, and a dashboard, seats. That's it. Whereas, you know, and, you know, if you remove the screen, you will find the exact same thing that you would find in, a car from, 100 years ago, right? That's the exact same thing you would find in a Model T if you remove the screen, right? So, have we evolved that much? Have we? Because, as I just said, you remove the screen, well, there's no difference than a Model T from a Tesla, right? If you remove the screen. Well, yes, in a manner of speaking, yes. I mean, you have ESC's traction control, you have all of it, you have launch control, which I'll get to in a minute. But, you know, obviously not all of this is a benefit. So let's start with traction control. I hate to make this episode fully based around cars, but it's the best kind of knowledge I have currently. So if you take traction control, what traction control does is it doesn't just make your car not want to do a burnout or drift as much, right? It actually just limits the throttle control. So if you're flooring it and then go around a corner, it will limit how much power is being delivered to the wheels. And that's traction control. Obviously, we didn't have that 50 years ago in, say, you didn't have that in your Ford Galaxy 60, 50, 40 years ago, right? Traction control was invented, I don't know, 90s, 80s, maybe even 2000s. Probably not the 2000s, but maybe. But anyway. And then as well, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, you also have something called launch control, and what launch control does is you enable it, and you put your foot on the brake, put it on the gas at the same time, rev it up, and there's a computer that will estimate the best amount of RPM, which is revolutions per minute. It measures how fast the crankshaft, I think, the crankshaft, camshaft, or flywheel, either one. It measures how many revolutions either one of those are doing, and it will say, okay, so if the driver is about to launch, and I choose around 35,000 or 3,500 RPM, I think that will be the perfect launch, right? And what a launch is just, you took foot off the brake and then car goes, right? So that is something that will help you if you're in, say, a race. But here's the thing. Races are most common in, official actual races, like, say, the NHRA or GT3. But does the NHRA or GT3 use launch control? No. It's all by feel. And sure, you can take your Porsche Cayman to the Nürburgring and set a lap time. But when else are you going to use it other than an illegal drag race with Ford Mustang, right? Well, you're just never. You're not going to you're rarely going to use these features. So they're just kind of, they're added for just for the hell of it, right? But anyway, I kind of want to lean the podcast away from vehicles because I will end up making the podcast the vehicle podcast. But I don't want to do that. But anyway, I'll just move on to something else. Okay. So back when the television was announced or introduced in I think it was the 1930s, 1940s, you had to get up from your couch and then change the channel using a little knob next to the screen. Well, that's not convenient. I want a remote. I want to remote control my television. And guess what they did? They did that exact thing. And we still use it today. In fact, my lamp has a remote control. And that is technologically advancing. But it is also not such a good thing. See, luckily my lamp does have controls on the shaft of it, but it still has a remote, which, yes, it is convenient, I will admit. But do I really want it? No. In fact, I use the controls on the shaft more than I do the remote. I sometimes even forget the remote exists. But anyway, we don't necessarily need these things, obviously. But they're just a nice thing to have, right? And again, we don't need these things, right? So let's take a look at, say, what would happen if we didn't have remote controls or, any of the electronics we have in vehicles today. Well, I think we would actually benefit from it, if you really think about it, because we would be so much less lazier if we didn't have these things. And again, they are convenient and nice to have. And, I'll sometimes, if I'm watching a movie on my computer and I just need to dim the lights down on my lamp because it's too bright, I just reach over and grab the remote. That's it. I have dimmed the lights. Don't need to do anything else. I can continue watching. Top Gear, right? But let's say my lamp doesn't have a remote. I would have to pause Top Gear, get up, and manually turn down the lamp, just by getting up, going over there, and turning it down, right? I don't want to do that. That sounds disgusting. I would rather have a remote to do all of that. I'm joking, obviously. I don't mind doing those things. They are convenient, but I don't mind getting up, just pausing a show, getting up and turning down the lamp, right? That's not something that is a bother to me. Right? Like, I don't care. I can just, it's a quick, 10-second process, right? Because my computer is, I could almost reach my lamp from where I'm sitting currently. But anyway, let's say the remote was never invented, right? For televisions, and you still had to turn a knob or dial, and just sit back down, continue watching, right? Well, again, I think we would benefit from that because, well, we wouldn't have to just reach over, grab the remote, right? And now they are thinking that, the remote is too much of a hassle to use, right? And they're coming out with voice control. And that's even worse, because you don't even need to move at all. You don't need to... All you have to move is your jaw and make something come out of your vocal cords, right? That's all you have to do. And, on some you may have to just talk up to... You may have to also grab the remote and, talk into a microphone in the remote. But even so, that's not as much as just moving your thumb around and, making some numbers or letters appear on a screen, right? You can just voice control it. And again, we haven't perfected this, right? Voice control is still in a work in progress. We haven't perfected this thing. If anything, we've done less than perfect this thing. It's still, as I've said, it's still a work in progress. We have more to work on that arena, right? But do we need to? No, we don't even need the remote. It's just convenient and technologically advancing, right? So anyway, something else that has evolved throughout time, as I'm sure you can guess, is sound systems, right? So, at current, I have 2 speakers and a subwoofer connected to my computer, right? And they make pretty good sound. I mean, they're really nice surround sound speakers. And, they're really nice to have. But, I wouldn't mind having, the world's first speaker if it still worked, right? I wouldn't mind having that, right? Because it would still, it plays sound. That's good enough for me, right? But anyway, so sound, let's say you go to a movie theater, or I'm sorry, a motion picture back in the 1920s, right? So you go to a movie theater, and back then there was no sound. There may have been sound back in the 20s, but back when there was no sound in movies, there was just a short little motion picture clip, essentially as a slideshow, and then there would be a little caption after the short little film of what the people in the film were saying. Now it is it's not just sound, but it's live sound, right? It happens as soon as the person talks with the help of microphones, right? And sure, you don't need a microphone, but if you want better audio quality and more condensed and muffled sound, you get a microphone, right? And I'll admit, what I use compared to what a movie industry uses is, well, it's like comparing the Titanic to just a little sailboat, right? It's I'm gonna say exactly what I use. I use an iPad, and I use the stock voice memo app, right? And then all of these camera companies are making these really high tech 8K HDR cameras and then they're allowing to make these really beautiful shots of just really beautiful movies, right? And again, that's nice to have, but do we need it? No, we don't need it at all. We barely even need microphones. We don't even need speakers because we still have captions, right? We don't even need the movie. The movie is just something to pass the time when you have nothing to do. It is a technological advancement. I feel like this podcast or this episode of the podcast has turned into human convenience, but anyway, it's still technological advancement, right? But anyway, something else that is, well, we never would have suspected it back in the, we wouldn't even have suspected it back in the 90s. Bluetooth. Bluetooth, if you don't know, is essentially a wireless, is transmitter the right word? I'm not sure. But it's a wireless connection between two things. Let's just say my headset, right? my headset is a wireless object, right? And what I can do is just wirelessly connect it to my computer, and then I can talk to my friends, right? So, the thing is, my computer is a foot away from me, right? So, any cord would be able, if any cord, if it were the correct cord, would be able to reach my computer, right? Because my head is just a few feet away from my computer. But the thing is, with Bluetooth, let's say your computer is 30 feet away from you, and you are sitting across a room where your TV is, or computer, or whatever, is on a wall just across the room from you, then it would be more convenient to have Bluetooth, and Bluetooth is a technological advancement. So anyway, Bluetooth, well, again, it's not something we've perfected. Apparently, and if anything, it actually hurts you. It's a harmful thing. It's because it sends in radio waves, which, as I'm sure you can suspect, is harmful. Not a lot of people know that, but it is true. Call me Alex Jones, but it's true. But anyway, so Bluetooth is, again, something we haven't perfected, right? It can be interrupted by, say, if your headset is is in another room, right? Then Bluetooth would not be able to send the radio wave across the room, right? Because, well, there's a wall blocking it, right? But say you are 30 feet away from it, that's a little far, but still, it would be a pretty decent connection, right? And of course, since my computer is right next to me, it's a beautiful connection and there's nothing wrong with it. So here's the issue. The major issue with Bluetooth, not only is it harmful, but say your neighbors, say you live in a very condensed neighborhood, where your neighbors are right next to you, right? That's kind of the case, where I live, right? But anyway, my neighbors can connect to my devices, and I can connect to their devices using Bluetooth. So, well, I don't want my neighbors connecting to Bluetooth, and I know they never would, but let's say they move out and their, 15-year-old kid that has no respect for anybody connects to one of my devices, and then I don't have control over this device anymore. Well, I don't want that, because that's my thing, and, well, I have authority over it, right? It's essentially like stealing, except you're not really stealing anything. You're just stealing someone's authority over something else, right? Which is still stealing, right? In a manner of speaking. But anyway, so that's the issue with Bluetooth, is that, well, I would rather just be able to let anyone in my house connect to Bluetooth than my neighbors, right? If you are in a scenario where people can easily connect to your Bluetooth devices. And, I can go on my computer right now, and I can see, several things that say unknown device, and I will know that those are my neighbor's Bluetooth devices. And, I've never connected to them because I'm not a jerk. But, I could do that if I wanted to, but I don't want to because, well, they're my neighbors. So anyway, to conclude, technological advancements, you can look at them either way. They're not something, that would help us be more active, right? But they're not something that they're not necessarily bad. They're just not perfect, right? they have their problems and they have their pros, right? They have their pros and cons. And I'm not saying you should take action against technological advancements, because you shouldn't. I mean, some of them are brilliant, and I have taken advantage of them. And of course, I don't take them for granted. But they are just a nice thing to have, and you sometimes just kind of forget about their existence. But anyway, and something that I've said to my friends is everything that is efficient in some kind of way has some kind of downside, right? Because, Bluetooth is, brilliant, right? You can easily connect to anything. You barely have to do anything. But at the same time, it's just as easy to make a cord attach from one thing to another. You can do it in the same time span. So, anyway, with that all said, I think it is time to end this episode. Have a good day, and don't take anything for granted.